Hello and welcome back to my channel, Rosie Home. My name's Sarah and in today's video I am going to be sharing something a little different with you. This is a DIY unicorn cake tutorial and this is very homemade. I made this cake myself and I wanted to show you how I did it so that you can make your very own unicorn cake at home as well. I am not professionally trained, I just enjoy making birthday cakes for my children. So keep watching to see how I make this unicorn birthday celebration cake. So the first thing I did was to line my baking tins with baking parchment. I am using baking tins that have the removable bottom just because I think it's a little easier to get the cake out at the end. So I'm lining both the bottom of the cake tin and the sides with baking parchment. This is because I would like the sides of the cake to be as straight as possible before we start. It means there's less work to do when you come to icing it. I then preheat the oven to 180 degrees C or 160 degrees C if you're using a fan oven. That is also gas mark 4. The first thing I do is then to cream the butter. I am using my KitchenAid freestanding mixer to do this, and I'm actually using Best for Baking rather than butter, but you could use either. I then add in the caster sugar and continue to mix till it is all combined. I then crack each of my eggs into a mixing jug and beat them lightly with a fork before adding them to the butter and sugar mixture gradually. So I try and aim for one egg at a time. I keep the freestanding mixer going whilst I do this, and I just pour in one egg at a time until all the eggs are incorporated into the cake mixture. Once all the eggs are combined, you can now add your flour. So you want to weigh out your flour on a pair of scales and add the flour to the KitchenAid or stand mixer and combine on a low speed setting so that your flour doesn't puff up everywhere. I always like to sieve my flour into my cake mix because it just makes for a lighter cake at the end. Your cake mixture is now ready for your cake tins. You want to split the mixture between your two cake tins and smooth out the top as much as you can. As a last minute addition, I decided to add some rainbow sprinkles to my cake mix, and I just poured half of the pot in with my cake mixture and then used a spatula to mix them in and ensure that they were evenly spaced within the cake mixture. This will add a lovely rainbow confetti look to the finished cake. You can just about see the rainbow confetti strands strewn around my cake mix. The cakes are then ready to go into the oven for 30 minutes or until a skewer comes out clean. And there you have your finished cakes. I'm now going to leave these to cool on a cake rack. I'm now going to start on the butter icing to decorate the cake. You always want to make sure you use real butter and no marge or baking substitute because butter icing just doesn't taste right without it. I start by creaming the butter in my KitchenAid, and again you want to make sure your butter is room temperature before you start. I am then going to sieve the icing sugar into the butter. I give the sieve a little shake to help it along. You always want to use double the amount of icing sugar to butter, so it doesn't matter what quantity of icing you need as long as you follow that ratio. Your butter icing will always turn out perfectly, so I keep mixing on a low setting until all the icing sugar is combined. If a lot of the powdered sugar is coming out of the bowl, sometimes I put a tea towel over the top of my KitchenAid to avoid any dust covering my worktops. Once that icing sugar is fully combined, you can then add your food colouring if you want to. Today I am making pink icing to cover the unicorn cake, so I'm adding some pink food colouring here.
Basically, I have filled some of my icing into this piping bag. I've piped a ring around the base layer of my cake, and I'm going to fill this with a little bit of jam.
The butter icing around the edge just creates a little barrier and means that any filling, so in this case jam, won't bleed out of the edge of the cake and start to colour the butter icing on the outside of the cake. I'm just using a spatula to spread out the jam to make sure it's nice and even all over the cake. I'm then adding a thin layer of butter icing on top of the jam because butter icing and jam are so good together. This is a classic combo, but it is a good one. Again, I'm just using my spatula to smooth out the butter icing on top. Again, less is more with this, but you want to smooth out that butter icing as well as you can. I'm then going to add the second cake layer, and I am just going to repeat those steps all over again. So first of all, I add a border of icing from my piping bag. I pipe that around the edge of my cake, apply the jam and spread that out with my spatula, and then apply a thin layer of butter icing on top of the jam just to seal it all in. Then add my third layer of cake, and I'm going to turn the cake upside down before I add it on top so that the straight edge is at the top of the cake. I then start to add a thin layer of icing on top of the cake. I then tried to pipe rings all the way around the cake because I thought this would be easier to ice, but as you will see, it didn't really work. It doesn't matter because when you use your spatula, you're going to cover the whole cake in icing anyway, so it doesn't matter how messy it looks at first. You can always neaten this up with your spatula after. And here I am spreading the butter icing all the way around the edge of my cake. As you can see, it looks a bit like a car crash at the moment, but luckily for you and me, the butter icing covers a multitude of sins. So you just keep layering up until your whole cake is covered and you have a nice smooth finish. This first layer is just a crumb coat, and I will be applying a second layer all over the cake. And that final layer will give me the nice smooth finish that I am after. As I said, this is a homemade DIY cake, so I'm not too fussed if it's not perfect. And I know that this cake is going to taste delicious, and that is the most important thing. Up the edges and wiping around the cake board with a piece of kitchen roll before popping this cake in the fridge to set for 10 minutes. The next step is to make more butter icing for the final layer of butter icing on my cake. I find that using 250 grams of butter and 500 grams of icing sugar will make enough butter icing to cover this size cake. I add my pink food colouring again to turn the icing pink. I then crack on with applying my second layer of butter icing to the cake. I find it much easier to get a smooth finish second time round. All the bumps are covered and you can really make the cake look nice and neat. As I said, I'm not worried about it being too perfect because I do think it adds to the homemade rustic charm when there are a few imperfections. You could literally carry on icing forever in search of perfection. So here is my finished final layer of butter icing. I'm pretty happy with that.
So here is what my cake is looking like now. I'm just going to make some more icing for the unicorn rosettes. So I split the mixture into 3. I put some in that bowl there, some in that bowl over there. So I've mixed up some yellow. Now I'm about to mix up some green. I've put some butter icing back in. I'm going to add some green food colouring, mix that up.
I then transfer each of my coloured icings into a piping bag, and I do this by putting the piping bag over a tall glass or container. I'm using a NutriBullet shaker to do this. It just makes it a little easier to put the icing into the piping bag because you can scrape the side against the side of the pot. I am then ready to start piping the rosettes onto the side of the cake. I have 4 piping bags to use, each in a different colour. For this cake I have gone with pink, green, yellow and lilac, and each piping bag has a different nozzle on the end to keep the rosettes looking different. I tend to use the star-shaped nozzle the most because that gives this nice swishy rosette look, which I think looks like a mane, but I'm also using the kiss style nozzle on this cake as well. I do like to get a picture up on my phone to use as a guide, but this is pretty random. There is no rhyme or reason to it. I try not to get 2 colours together, but I just randomly start swirling. You will soon get little holes appear, and I just keep going until I've filled in all the gaps and the whole cake is covered. You want the mane to go up the middle of the cake and then to swoosh round to one side.
So I finished the mane. And I just need to put the unicorn face on.
This is actually quite tricky, and I am using some shop-bought black icing to do this. A trick that I have found is to warm the icing before you start to pipe it. It just makes it a bit more pliable and easy to draw on the eyelashes. And I just do this in a cup of boiling water.
So here is the finished cake, and I thought I'd just talk you through all the nozzles that I used to create the swirls. So this big one at the back here, the main star tip, that is your average cupcake swirl, and that's what I've made the big pink swirls with. The next size down is this star tip, which is the yellow swirls. This one was the green swirls, and this little round one was the little kiss shapes. They look like American kisses, just like little dollops really. And yeah, that is my finished unicorn cake. I drew on the black eyelashes with this black designer icing. This is ready-made. I just warmed it up in some hot water before I used it, and you attach this nozzle. It came with the icing, and you just screw that onto the top of the icing, and then you can ice with it. My icing isn't the best, but this is a DIY unicorn cake. And basically when doing the swirls, I didn't film that much of it because my battery died, but you literally just build it up, and I did it randomly. So I just did a few pink swirls, then a few yellow swirls, then a few green swirls, then I went back to my piping bags and added some more in between until you get the effect that you're after. But yeah, I'm really pleased with the finished look. I think it's really nice, and I think the birthday girl is going to love it. So I just wanted to show you these if you're wondering where the unicorn horn and ears are. I actually purchased these from Amazon, and they are like China porcelain ears and horn. In the past I've tried making them, but they've never turned out very well. These are so easy. I think they were like $6.99, and you can literally stick these in the top of your cake and you always will have the perfect unicorn horn and ears. These are reusable, so I've reused these on a number of different cakes. I'll insert pictures of them. And the reason I didn't put them on the top of this cake is because this cake was going to my friend's for her little girl's birthday party, and she needed to put it in the fridge before serving, and I knew it wouldn't fit with the horns on top. So I hope you understand why the horns aren't on top of the cake, and I haven't got any pictures of that, but it is really, really easy to slot these on top of your cake. I will link where to get these from in the description bar down below.
Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you found it helpful if you are planning on creating your very own DIY unicorn birthday cake. If you do, then please do let me know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!